The next is by PhyllisShacter. She has been a teacher, business consultant, life coach, and public speaker, including her TEDx talk, Not Here by Choice, about her and her husband's decision. She has a detailed website about VSED, and her personal story is at PhyllisShacter.com. She uses her skills today to share her personal story to educate others about end-of-life choices. She resides in Bellingham, Washington. Welcome, Phyllis.
Good afternoon. I'm going to share a very personal family perspective with you. It has to do with love, courage, advocacy, and choice. This story could be about you because illness and end-of-life issues and ultimately death will come to all of us. It is my hope that by sharing our story, you, yourself, your family, and friends have greater peace of mind. I had a very loving marriage with my husband, Alan, for 26 years. Alan was a Harvard graduate, a computer scientist, and a trainer and practitioner of neuro-linguistic programming. Toward the end of 2011, he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. Ultimately, while he was still mentally competent, he decided to voluntarily stop eating and drinking rather than live into the late stages of Alzheimer's. It took him 9.5 days to die, and he died in April of 2013. A couple of weeks before he stopped eating and drinking, he was sitting at our breakfast table, and I was standing nearby. And I noticed that he was crying. I said, "Honey, why are you crying? What are you feeling?" And he said, "I'm not afraid of dying. I've lived a good life, but I want everyone to know about VSED." And before I could get the words out of my mouth, I spontaneously replied, "You'll just have to trust that I'll be your vehicle." As a result of witnessing the VSED process and seeing it work well, I have become a spokesperson for this end-of-life choice. I am the catalyst for the creation of this conference. I do have what I believe is the most detailed website yet today on VSED and our personal story. And in a basket on the table over there are cards, so you can easily access my website and my TED Talk to get more information. I hope my husband's and my personal story will address some of your questions and concerns. In the few minutes that I have with you, I will tell you why not eating and drinking is an important option for some people. I will go into detail about our personal story, and I will conclude with a request. Why is VSED so important right now? Alzheimer's is the fastest growing disease. Only a few states, including Washington, have the death with dignity law. And in those few states, it says that people with Alzheimer's and most neurological diseases will not qualify for the law because you have to be mentally competent in the last 6 months of life and be able to self-administer the drug. Well, we know Alzheimer's patients are not going to be mentally competent in the last 6 months of life. VSED, a legal option, needs to be known as an end-of-life choice for people with many different kinds of debilitating diseases. My husband said that even if he had had the choice to use the death with dignity law, he still would have chosen to stop eating and drinking because he really wanted to have a more natural, organic death. This was the most difficult thing I've ever had to do. I was his advocate, and I supported him, first to look at all of his options, and then to back him, whatever he decided. and then ultimately to make all of the arrangements for him to go through the VSED process in a supportive, loving, and dignified manner. I didn't know one person who had done this. I had no guide or book to read. I got some support from End of Life Washington. I had to investigate all of the pieces myself. Who would support us? How could this be done with dignity? Was this legal? Who would help Alan throughout the process? Who would take care of me? What did I need to do to fulfill Alan's request so that he could have his choice? All of these questions were overwhelming. A significant concern was that there be no legal risk to me, our caregivers, or our doctor. I did some legal research and soon found Thaddeus Pope's long white paper on VSED as a legal option, and I shared this information with Alan. And after he read this paper, about 6 months before he died, he said to me, "I've read this paper, and I've decided I'm going to VSED." I continued to question him so many times about his decision to make he was absolutely certain this is what he wanted to do, that finally one day he turned to me and said, "Please, don't ask me anymore. I've made up my mind." As the following months went by, he became more and more comfortable and at peace with his decision. And he spoke these actual words to some friends. When I didn't know anything about this, as probably very few people do, it sounded horrible. Now that I've investigated it, it doesn't sound horrible, and I'm going to do it, VSED. I'm doing it because I have a disease that will rob me of the ability to make this choice. I have Alzheimer's, and Phyllis and I went to visit an Alzheimer's facility, and I couldn't imagine living there. This helped me make my decision to VSED. Once Alan made his decision, he lived in a state of deep, calm, accepting presence. And he spoke these actual words to me. "I am comfortable and at ease with everything. I just feel great all the time, even when I'm tired. People notice how happy I look. I think that's important because I'm really at the end of this life. Before, I was burdened by all the things I thought I should be doing, and I'm not anymore. I have no fear of dying." Determining a marker and setting a date is a big challenge, and it's absolutely essential. Of course, my husband wanted to live as long as possible, and he didn't want to miss his mark when he would no longer be mentally competent. He had a marker, and it had to do with his quality of life. He said that his marker would be that when he could no longer leave the house and go to our local spiritual center, he was done. This was a center that we both loved and supported us, and he was the keyboard player there for about 7 years. He got to the point where it was just too exhausting for him to engage much with people anymore. He said to me, "I can't go to the center. I'm just too tired." At this point, he was sleeping at least 16 hours a day. He had other neurological symptoms, and our doctor thought it was probably Parkinson's. He had little affect in his face and was losing his balance and shuffled when he walked and had difficulty putting words in sentences. And in this conversation, he said to me, "It's time for me to stop eating and drinking." And I agreed with him. And I told him that I thought in a couple more months he would no longer be mentally competent. Alan said he wanted to speak with his counselor one more time, and we did this together on the phone. And when we got off the phone, he turned to me and said, "I'm starting in 1 week." To hasten the process, Alan ate no more than 500 calories a day for 5 days. And when he awoke on the morning of April 10th, 2013, he no longer ate food or drank any liquid. He basically just went to bed and stopped eating and drinking. All of Alan's needs were met by me, 2 caregivers, and our doctor. We had known our doctor for several years. She was very aware of his wishes. We all placed great emphasis on keeping him comfortable. Alan wanted to spend the first few days mostly alone because he had said all of his goodbyes, and every night his daughter called on the phone and we put the speakerphone to his ear and he could hear her loving words. Alan knew he had choice about medication. Yet, he told our doctor he wanted as little medication as possible because he wanted to be as aware as possible throughout the entire process. Fortunately, our doctor did stay one step ahead of him and made sure that he was comfortable. I didn't want him to suffer at all. The amount of medication a person receives is personal and will depend on the doctor-patient relationship and circumstances. Good medical support is essential. Our doctor made 3 home visits during the 9.5 days. Each time she examined Alan, adjusted medication, and gave us instructions for his continued care. She was on 24-hour call throughout the entire time, and there were times we called her in the middle of the night. We continued to spray frequent mists of water into his mouth. We massaged his body with lotion, and we played the music that he had chosen. Each day, Alan got visibly weaker and more wobbly. It didn't take long before he couldn't get out of bed without assistance. He went from being able to toilet himself to using the commode, then the urinal, and then a diaper. He was frequently turned in bed when he could no longer turn himself. His urine went from normal yellow to dark orange to being very dark and minimal. He received a laxative suppository so he wouldn't become constipated and uncomfortable. On the morning of the 3rd day, I was surprised with a call from a social worker from Adult Protective Services. She said somebody had reported possible elder abuse and that she'd be at our house in 10 minutes to investigate. I'm glad I didn't have more notice because this visit stunned me. I initially spoke with the social worker. I took her into Alan's room then, and then we sat at the foot of his bed and she got to ask questions about his choice. And then I left him alone for a few minutes and I went and I called our elder care attorney and gathered our legal documents together. And then I had the opportunity to educate this social worker about his choice. I showed her his health directive, his Alzheimer's Advanced Mental Health Directive, a copy of the long white paper by Thaddeus Pope describing this as a legal option. And I showed her the witnessed and notarized release and assumption of risk statement signed by Alan and me, protecting the doctor, the caregivers, and myself. Alan took all responsibility for his decision. Later, not that much later, I received a letter from the social worker, and these are some of her exact words. I'm glad to have met you, and I truly appreciate all I learned from you. Your courage, strength, and love were and are unique to behold. On days 3 and 4, Alan had some increased restlessness and showed some signs of discomfort due to dehydration. He never complained about hunger, and he was given appropriate medication. And by the 4th day, he wanted people around him more, and he wanted to be touched gently. I gave explicit instructions that I be the only person who could communicate with Alan if he asked for food or water. And on the 4th and 5th days, he did ask me for water. And this is exactly what I said to him. You said you wanted to stop eating and drinking because you said you want to die rather than live into the late stages of Alzheimer's. I'll give you whatever you want. So would you like a glass of water? Or would it just be enough if I spray mists of water into your mouth until you are satisfied? And both times he said the mists of water were enough. Of course, I was prepared to give him whatever he requested. On the sixth day, he could only talk metaphorically and in gibberish. And on this day, I began to spend a lot of time in bed with him in the small hospital bed. And on this day, he looked at his wrist and imaginary watch and said, "I've got to get the milk. What time is it? The people are at the party." On the eighth day, we could hear the rattling in Alan's lungs. He could no longer communicate with his words, and his eyes were closed. And I got very close to him, and I said, "Alan, I am here with you. If you are comfortable, blink your eyes." And with his eyelids closed, he was able to move his eyelids and communicate with me. And I knew he was all right. And on this day, with his eyelids closed, he mouthed his last words to me. "I love you." The caregiver awakened me a little after midnight on the ninth day. Alan's breathing had shifted and was now loud and rapid. I crawled into bed with him. Later that morning, the doctor came to our house and examined him and told us that only his brainstem was alive and that his heart was still strong. And she said he would most likely live another 1 to 3 days. He was in a coma. As soon as the doctor left the house, I went into Alan's bedroom and I closed the doors and I just stood there. And then I spontaneously began to talk to him. And I told him how proud I was of him and how courageous I thought he was and how he was going to get his wish and not have to live into the late stages of Alzheimer's. I told him this was our last partnership and that I was going to be all right and that now I was going to help midwife him home. And instead of it taking another 1 to 3 more days like the doctor had just said, my husband left his body in 15 minutes with me by his side, talking to him and loving him. And what was I experiencing through all this? I was vulnerable, grief-stricken, anxious, and fearful. I knew that the only way I would ever get out of my grief was to go through it. And that's exactly what I've done. I had good professional support. It took me a long time. And I'm very grateful there's joy in my life again today and that I can do this work for the benefit of others. I partnered with my husband every day of our marriage. We helped each other become the best human being we each could become. And although I went through the normal grieving process of losing my husband, my grief was complicated by the fact that we both had minimal guidance about how to go through the VSED process. I experienced a lot of judgment based on other people's beliefs. And this resulted in my feeling traumatized with acute stress. If not eating and drinking had been an acceptable and known choice in our culture, I believe I would have experienced much less stress. The reason I'm here today is to move this end-of-life choice forward so it becomes an accepted and supported choice in our culture. Beliefs and opinions about death vary widely. What is a belief? One of Alan's favorite quotes hanging above his desk is this: "A belief is just a story you tell yourself about what is. A belief is just a feeling of certainty about what is. A belief is not the truth." Our beliefs are often formed during our childhood. They're based on religious and cultural upbringing. And as we age, we have the opportunity to re-examine our beliefs. What beliefs serve us? What beliefs correspond to our real experience? What beliefs limit our life or diminish our experience? And as our friends and family and community began to hear about Alan's choice, we encountered a lot of other people's beliefs. For example, when I contacted our local hospice in Whatcom County and asked them for support, they said they would not help him until he was in the end stage of coma. I was shocked. I believe our hospices, the religious institutions that own many of our hospices, and Medicare regulations need to address and support VSED. Caregivers had their beliefs. It was hard to find the right caregivers because caregivers endeavor to help people extend their lives with a good quality of life, not shorten their lives with a good quality of death. Some people in our community asked, "Is Alan committing suicide?" Didn't matter to us what people said or how they labeled it. All we cared about was that Alan was going to be able to have a dignified death, a good death, on his terms. My husband said yes to his life up to his last breath. He made a clear decision, made with the support of loved ones. It gave him the opportunity to plan his death and to take care of unfinished personal and emotional issues. It gave him time to say goodbye to his family and friends. Other people in the community said that Alan was dying prematurely. Yes, it was true. This could not be timed perfectly. He did give up some quality of life in order to have a good quality of death on his terms. He watched his mother suffer and die for more than 10 years with Alzheimer's. He was absolutely certain this is not how he wanted to live the rest of his life and then die from that disease. In the end, most of what we say and live by are beliefs, not the absolute truth. Beliefs shift and change. What are your own limiting beliefs about death? How do they affect your relationship with those that you help? What you personally think, feel, and do is your own domain. But by hearing our story, it is my hope that you will have new perspectives and open your mind and your heart to the VSED choice. I'm glad my husband fulfilled his desire to not live into the late stages of Alzheimer's. He said he wanted everyone to know about VSED. I'm carrying out his request because I witnessed his peaceful death. I respect his courage, and his demonstration broadened my own view about my death. He had a good quality of death, and he did this by voluntarily stopping eating and drinking. We can support people and give families an alternative to the horrors of Alzheimer's and other debilitating diseases. I'm concluding with this request. Please be proactive with this information I'm giving you. Share it with your patients, your clients, your families, your friends. Then let each individual choose.
We will take time, just 5 minutes now, for questions to Phyllis specifically.
Looks like I might have covered all bases. No.
Hi there.
Oh, okay.
I'm Lisa Taylor. I'm an internist from Cape Cod, Massachusetts.
That's where Alan's.
Oh, sorry. Is the mic on? No? Okay, sorry. Testing, testing, testing.
I could start singing and then you'd all be really sorry.
Maybe that did it. Thank you. Hi, sorry about that. Lisa Taylor. I'm an internist from Cape Cod, Mass. First of all, thank you for that incredibly moving and powerful talk. I really appreciate that. My question is, did you have a plan B? It seems like your husband had this not perfect, but things fell into place well for him. His physical body gave out before his mental status changes. It progressed too quickly. What would you have done if it had been the other way around?
Well, we don't know because it wasn't the other way around, but what we did to prepare for this, I didn't make this part of my talk, but in a 6-week period of time, my husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's and laryngeal cancer, 6 weeks apart. He said no to the 3 surgeries that were recommended by the surgeon. Instead, we used alternative healing modalities, and he healed from the cancer in 4 months. Then, 6 months prior to him dying, he had his own celebration of life so he could attend his own funeral. Then we went and visited the Alzheimer facility, and it was the most difficult day probably of my life. And within 15 minutes of being in the facility, we were both so shaky and crying that we had to just sit down because we were sobbing at what we witnessed at people who were in the last about 12 to 18 months of life. So if he had lived, he would have lived, and then something else would have happened. I don't know. But we covered a lot of bases and groundwork and did a lot of investigating until he made his decision. And by the time he made his choice, he was actually looking forward to getting out of his sick body.
Thank you. I think it's, I just find it fortunate that he was able to have the capacity to do that.
That was key.
Right.
That was key. And yes, he did miss some quality of life.
Right. What's the trade-off?
Yes, that was key. And of course, capacity was determined ahead of time and so forth, but that was key. And fortunately, we timed it right.
You did. Thank you.
Yeah.
On the heels of that question, and first a comment about thank you for taking this mission and organizing this conference and being so eloquent and moving personally again. We've had several conversations, and I didn't learn until later that Alan had laryngeal cancer as well. But one of the things you said both before and now is that you thought he had a few months left only while he still retained decisional capacity. And it's known that some people in the early to middle stages of dementia can still really enjoy life in many ways, even if they can't make significant decisions. Mm-hmm. If Alan had had an opportunity to be confident in the fact that if he lost decisional capacity, there was another way out for him, that he could leave and die peacefully and timely by another set of criteria, even if he wasn't competent or have capacity at the time, would he have wanted to live longer? And even if Alan would not have wanted, shouldn't that be part of the message that you really have 3 choices? Choice 1 is die now because you still have capacity. Choice 2, which is the misery of prolonged dying in advanced dementia. And choice 3 is another way out with an advance directive that is good enough to carry out your wishes later on.
We're both very well-educated people. We examined all of our choices, and the choice that he made is what gave us both peace of mind. It wasn't easy. Everything else is hypothetical and assumptive in terms of what might have happened. What if in the future? My husband had a good death, you know? It couldn't be timed perfectly. He had a good death, and I'm grateful for that, and that he didn't have to suffer more than he had already.